냐제 쳔보도 돈닝미장 돈는 모놈 쳔보 냐게다 나그라다르간 산도 셔마도 tumbato je janla ki shomsar ne chen ro zer ngi jang gam sa ja wor tu ji shan lo ya la man ji me ban zo ja la so ra ngon ji to ban bo ro shin ji lo gon ji to ban bo ro shin ji lo gon ji to ban bo ro shin ji lo.
Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching.
Today we will continue our study of the Shurangama Sutra. This Shurangama Sutra, compared to the wish-fulfilling treasury, might be slightly more difficult to understand, but the Shurangama Sutra is indeed very interesting. Therefore, I also hope that during our process of studying the Shurangama Sutra, everyone will not feel weary or discouraged. When studying any Dharma, however diligent you were at the beginning, by the very last day, you should be just as diligent. In this way, this is the true spirit of seeking the Dharma. We know that right now this Shurangama Sutra, in the dialogue between the Buddha and Venerable Ananda, we mentioned in the previous class, after the Buddha gave such a teaching, Ananda was still stuck on words, language, and conceptual thoughts. Then the Buddha specifically reprimanded him, saying, "Why do you then continue to cheat yourself by standing still, merely watching and listening?" These people mentioned earlier, including Yasodhara, and the young Matanga woman and others, have already attained the holy fruition. These women have already attained the holy fruition. But you, as a man, a monastic, a great man, are still stuck in such conceptual thoughts and such listening and contemplating. It is quite laughable, quite pitiful. Indeed, everyone's diligence and level of practice are different. Some people come later, but practicing the Dharma resonates with them particularly well. They practice for a very short time, and after practicing the results are extremely obvious. Some people, although they have listened and studied for many years, the results are not very obvious, and they even regress. Eventually they even develop wrong views and slander the true Dharma. There are also such phenomena. Of course, in our world, whether they are Buddhists or other people, there is nothing that does not exist. There are people of all kinds of capacities. This is not strange at all. It is also a truly natural phenomenon. But speaking for ourselves, actually practice is indeed very important. Practice is extremely important. Next, the Buddha continues to tell Ananda and the assembly, when Ananda and the others in the great assembly, this is not spoken by the Buddha. When Ananda and the others in the great assembly had heard the Buddha's instructions, their doubts and delusions were dispelled, their minds awakened to the truth, and in body and mind they felt a serenity that they had never known before. It says here, because those present, led by Ananda, along with many great bodhisattvas and arhats, and the great assembly, the disciples of the fourfold assembly, had just heard the Buddha's teachings and instructions. Earlier, the Buddha used a rather reprimanding tone to criticize Venerable Ananda and so on. After such instructions, Ananda and the assembly, after hearing the Buddha's teachings like this, had their doubts dispelled. Their coarse and subtle doubts and afflictions, mainly afflictions and doubts, were dispelled. Their minds awakened to the truth. Their minds were opened and awakened. They completely understood the true reality of these dharmas. Of course, this awakening is not the same as the Buddha's enlightenment. Actually, regarding the importance of true practice, as well as the Tathagata Garbha and the Dharma of causes and conditions, they had already understood these truths clearly. At this time in body and mind they felt a serenity that they had never known before. At that time Ananda and the others, this kind of serenity in body and mind, this physical and mental joy, they had never known before, they had never experienced it. Actually, these followers must have had very good capacities. Sometimes when we ask questions ourselves, or after we have attended many classes, it seems we don't feel much. To immediately feel serenity in body and mind, and undergo a great transformation, after just one class or after someone has given a teaching is quite rare for many people. However, in the past, when we listened to the Dharma from His Holiness, there were indeed many times we had this kind of feeling. Whether he was teaching Buddhist logic, teaching Madhyamaka, or teaching Tantric teachings, it seemed that every time we listened to the Dharma, the changes in our body and mind were immense. Although I wouldn't dare say it was enlightenment or a very high state at the very least towards this Dharma, we generated immense faith and joy, and the feeling, this experiential response was very strong. Wow, this Dharma is very important. This is taught so exceptionally well. One naturally became completely immersed in it. Actually, this is very important. No matter what class we are listening to, everyone listens every day. But if you listen just for the sake of listening to the Dharma, to fulfill a kind of task, just sitting among the ranks of those listening to the Dharma, with no feeling, no response, and taking no notes, if you are just killing time like this, I feel it has no meaning. Of course, we cannot compare to Venerable Ananda, who, after listening to the Buddha's teaching every time, immediately had an exceptionally great transformation. I wouldn't dare say that. But at the very least for anyone it is a kind of respect for the speaker. Even if they do not speak particularly well, it is not necessarily completely bad. It should be that among the principles they teach, some are acceptable. Sometimes, for example, when we attend a meeting, everyone's way of expressing themselves is different. Some people might not have good eloquence, and they might speak hesitantly, so the people around them seem uninterested. Actually, it shouldn't be like this. If you are attending a meeting, at that time you should listen very earnestly. Whether they speak well or not, you should listen. Whether it is someone tutoring or someone giving a class, either you don't listen or if you do, listen earnestly. Trying to enter their wisdom is still meaningful. So look at Ananda, his experiential response is very strong. Their bodies and minds at that time were extremely refreshed. Once again Ananda wept as he bowed at the Buddha's feet. Then he knelt, and with his palms joined he said respectfully to the Buddha, "The supreme, compassionate, pure and noble King has skillfully opened our minds. In response to our various situations and circumstances, he has been able to urge us on and to pull us benighted ones out of the sea of suffering in which we have been drowning." But he says here, at that time Venerable Ananda once again began to shed tears of sorrow. Therefore some, including Master Yu Nying in some of their commentaries, mention that Ananda was crying for the 5th time. This is the 5th time. They have counted throughout the entire Shurangama Sutra. The first time should be when he was disturbed by the young Matangi woman. When he had just returned, after finally being liberated from it, when he returned to the Buddha, he felt that his extensive learning was completely useless. When he encountered the demoness, he had absolutely no ability to deal with or counteract her, and then he cried in front of the Buddha. There are also a few other places, every time the Buddha criticized him or spoke, because he had not comprehended the Buddha's secret intent, he kept crying. In some of their commentaries they have already listed the first time, the second time, all the way up to this 5th time of crying. Ananda was just like this. Generally speaking, we say men do not shed tears easily, great men do not cry easily. But if compassion arises, some male practitioners also cry very easily. I have sometimes criticized some people. Some might remember clearly, "Oh, cried once, cried twice, I don't know." For volunteer workers there are probably some who have cried 5 times. At that time he cried. After he cried he didn't generate anger, nor did he generate wrong views. He immediately bowed at the Buddha's feet, knelt and joined his palms. Then he presented his request and addressed the Buddha, making his request like this, reporting to the Buddha, making a request like this. The supreme, compassionate, pure and noble King, the Buddha is of supreme great compassion, an extremely compassionate, pure, wish-fulfilling Dharma King, has skillfully opened our minds. Please use the most supreme and excellent methods to open my mind and wisdom. In response to our various situations and circumstances, you use such various causes, conditions, analogies, skillful means, as well as encouragement, praise, guidance, and all sorts of methods. Actually, the Buddha, toward his disciples below, sometimes tells public cases, sometimes uses analogies, sometimes explains certain principles, sometimes debates, sometimes reprimands, and sometimes criticizes, and so on, using various methods and skillful means to remind them or allow them to guide what? Those sentient beings drowning in extreme darkness so they can escape the bitter sea of samsara early. This means, O greatly compassionate Buddha, you, in order to open our wisdom, previously used various analogies and various manifestations, giving us the desire to leave such samsara. Venerable Ananda continues to say, World-honored one, now that I have heard the Buddha explain this Dharma, I know that the matrix of the thus come one, which is the wondrous enlightened mind that understands, extends throughout all 10 directions. I know that it encompasses and supports the lands of the thus come ones in all 10 directions, those pure and splendid lands of the wondrous enlightened kings. He says, since the Buddha has given us such a teaching, world-honored one, today I have already been blessed with such a particularly supreme Dharma sound from the thus come one. The earlier Dharma sound criticized him, saying he was not as good as the women, and so on. Such Dharma sound, I only now understand that actually the matrix of the thus come one, our inherently complete matrix of the thus come one, the wondrous enlightened mind that understands, actually extends throughout the 10 directions. This is what we call the Dharmakaya, because the true nature of the matrix of the thus come one, the Dharmakaya, extends throughout the lands in the 10 directions. This refers to the Dharmakaya. It encompasses and supports the lands of the thus come ones in all 10 directions. Whether encompassing and supporting or manifesting the lands of the thus come ones in all 10 directions. This refers to the Nirmanakaya, because the Nirmanakaya, within the purity of the Dharmakaya, and without wavering from it, manifests the lands of the 10 directions within the worlds of the 10 directions, and then manifests the thus come ones of the 10 directions, those pure and splendid lands of the wondrous, enlightened kings. This refers to the pure lands of the Sambhogakaya, that is to say, it simultaneously manifests pure and splendid lands, like the 5 types of Sambhogakaya pure lands. Such lands of the wondrous enlightened kings, Venerable Ananda says, World-honored one, today I have felt that actually, after you have spoken like this matrix of the thus come one, can manifest in this world in the form of the 3 kayas. However, the thus come one has also admonished me for merely listening to the Dharma without applying it to my practice, and the most important words of the thus come one, reprimanding and criticizing me again, saying that extensive listening is of no use, that it has no benefit, that it falls short of, or is not as good as, actual practice. Didn't we discuss this yesterday? Why do you then continue to cheat yourself by standing still, merely watching and listening? Everyone should remember this sentence. Actually, many of us really have a lot in common with Ananda. In the process of studying the Shurangama Sutra, I personally feel sometimes that I am particularly similar to Ananda. It seems sometimes I somewhat understand, feeling good and getting a grasp of it. Sometimes I don't understand, as if spinning around in circles. We feel that sometimes, of course, we don't have a high state of realization like Ananda, but it seems there are similarities, half understanding things. Ananda was the same. It seems one moment he was incredibly happy. Wow, I understand. Thank you so much, Buddha. And the next moment he was confused again, and after getting confused he felt sad. Actually, many of us practitioners really might share some of Ananda's feelings, perhaps having the same feeling. So he says here, the Buddha has reprimanded me once again, saying extensive listening has no meaning and is inferior to actual practice. He speaks of it here. It is like, now therefore I am like a wanderer who unexpectedly meets a celestial king. The king bestows upon the wanderer a magnificent house. The house is now his. Yet in order to go in, he will still need to find a door. He uses an analogy. I was reprimanded, told that extensive listening is inferior to actual practice. Ananda himself says, "Now I am like a wandering traveler who suddenly receives a magnificent house or grand mansion bestowed by a celestial king. It's like a wandering person, a very pitiful person, suddenly being bestowed a grand mansion by the Lord of Heaven. At this time the house is now his, although at that time I have already obtained such a large and magnificent house and have a place to stay. But to truly enter inside one needs to find a door. Yet in order to go in he will still need to find a door." Some commentaries explain that the celestial king here actually refers to the Buddha, a magnificent house bestowed upon me by the Buddha. The magnificent house is equivalent to the Dharma gate of the matrix of the Thus Come One. He was taught such a precious thing. I have already obtained this. I have obtained the magnificent house, and also gained a series of faith and understanding. But to truly enter one needs to practice. Although the celestial king gave Ananda such a grand mansion, in reality he hasn't entered it yet. To enter one needs the key to the door. If you don't even have the key, running back and forth outside or acting like this is actually of little significance. So although we, relying on the kindness of our masters, have listened to a lot of Dharma, but if we don't practice this Dharma it truly won't work. Therefore some time ago, and especially this year, I told everyone, especially if our 5 treatises class were to practice every day, this might be unrealistic, because for the entire male and female Sangha of Larungar, the 5 treatises class still needs to study the 5 great treatises. But as much as possible every day, either privately or collectively, do some see if you can engage in formal meditation sessions. This is one thing. Especially for our practice classes, there should be plenty of time available. I suggest, for example, for the Pure Land class, if one can rest in the nature of mind, resting is also fine. If one cannot rest in it, then chant the heart mantra of Avalokiteshvara and the name and heart mantra of Amitabha Buddha, because for elderly people, sometimes when sitting in Zen meditation, who knows what might happen? They might fall asleep while sitting, or even pass away while sitting. There is this possibility. So I don't dare to force you to sit all the time. I wouldn't dare say that. However, for us practitioners, it is best, because you don't have to take exams or do other things. Right now, our practice classes are a place where many people go to escape, because there is no need to take exams and no need to recite from memory. In this case, for one thing, just sitting there like that is not acceptable. I think at least 8 hours of Zen meditation a day would be quite good. Sitting at home for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. In the morning, everyone meditating collectively, teaching a class for an hour, and then an hour of Zen meditation. In the afternoon, meditating collectively for 1 to 2 hours. It would be best to reach 8 hours. If 8 hours is really not possible, then around 6 hours, let's see. If it's not like this currently, in our actual practice classes, there are more and more people. More people is very good, but it's not just about having a lot of people. Here, some people, the distribution of things is quite a lot. They eat until they are full, and then they don't have to do volunteer work, nor do they need to listen and contemplate. They just lie there. Some who have a better relationship with the Khenpos and Khenmos won't be treated too strictly by them, and they pretend to be sick. In this way I see this as truly deceiving oneself and others. You see, Ananda was so earnest, yet the Buddha still reprimanded him, saying, "You are deceiving yourself." So if we are not practicing well, look at our current listening and contemplating classes. They start reciting from memory so early in the morning. Whether it's they're reciting from memory, including the pressure of being held back a grade, it is so great. If our practice classes have no pressure at all, that is definitely not acceptable. Besides, if you want to truly practice, you really need to spend time. Zen meditation is still necessary. At the very beginning, you might find sitting for 15 minutes or half an hour very difficult. But if you truly sit, you should get used to it. It's fine. At the very beginning, didn't we have a 15-day retreat the other day? At the very beginning, sitting for an hour or two, it might be just a little bit difficult. But after that, you get used to it. There is no problem. So regarding the practice classes here, I am also stating here that you should have this key. Otherwise, the reason why there are more and more people is also because everyone feels that this grand mansion is already in their hands, and now they absolutely must enter it. If you want to enter, you can't just every day barely listen to a class from the Dharma master. The Dharma master is also very compassionate. In 1 hour, everything is finished. This is probably not acceptable. Everyone should. In our Chinese Han Buddhism, generally it's the Zen school. In the Zen school, collective practice is very much promoted. Nowadays it's not common. Otherwise, looking historically, it should all be everyone meditating collectively, attending 7-day Zen retreats. So I think we might, of course, at the very beginning, if the pressure is extremely high, but some people are like that, barely listening to a class in the morning. I see people from the practice classes often outside buying groceries or picking up packages. It seems they are seen doing this quite often. What is the reason? They are quite relaxed, so we must make the practice classes so demanding that ultimately they cannot just stay there. The pressure should be even greater than in the listening and contemplating classes. In the end, those who truly practice should stay. Those who do not actually practice, those who are just hiding there, we should find a way to weed them out. This is also a requirement of management. Otherwise, regarding this aspect, the Khenpos and Khenmos are the same. As they get a little older, if they can still completely teach the 5 great treatises, if not, they might think, I'll just lead an actual practice class next year. There is a kind of immense pressure, for the Khenpos and Khenmos too, right now over these past few years. It has always been, I've just been pretending not to notice and observing. But actually sometimes there is this trend. So the actual practice classes still, you see, what is taught here is very important. So we still need to see how you all, regarding this, some of you should come up with a proposal first. This proposal, when the time comes, I will also participate in reviewing it, to see how it goes, how this proposal will be passed. First, these Khenpos and Khenmos of the practice classes, you should hold a meeting. How is your current state of practice? How is the state of practice of your disciples? Why is it that many people now particularly like your group? Is the reason truly wanting liberation or wanting to be lazy? This problem must be identified. If the problem cannot be identified, perhaps it is still as we feel. If even Ananda was told he was deceiving himself, then we might truly be, why do you then continue to cheat yourself by standing still, merely watching and listening? We don't even want to listen to some things anymore. If that's the case, it is not acceptable. This was just a brief explanation. Next, Ananda requests the Buddha to give a teaching. I only hope that the thus come one will not withhold his compassion from all of us in this assembly who are covered in darkness, so that we may renounce the lesser vehicle. May he show us the road that leads from our original resolve to the thus come one's bodiless nirvana. He says, I only hope that the greatly compassionate Buddha will not abandon your great compassion, and then instruct those of us in the assembly who have been obscured by ignorance and affliction since beginningless time. These people who have been obscured, in order for us to abandon the lesser vehicle, to renounce the lesser vehicle, so that we may ultimately attain the thus come one's bodiless nirvana. And what kind of resolve should we make to make the resolve on the supreme path of Bodhi? In other words, we are, now you see, Ananda had already made the resolve earlier, but it's just like our making of resolves, reciting the sadhana of generating bodhicitta every day, but afterwards when encountering situations we fail again. So Ananda also beseeches the Buddha's great compassion, please look at us pitiful sentient beings. we still wish to abandon the lesser vehicle and ultimately attain the thus come one's nirvana. Also we want to generate the Mahayana bodhicitta. May he enable those of us who still need instruction to subdue our age-old habit of dependence on the objects of the senses, to master the dharani, and to gain the wisdom and vision of the Buddhas. Then he says, we want to generate bodhicitta, and to enable those of us who still need instruction, these students, beginners, through what kind of method should we subdue, whether it is subdue, purify, or sever. Then what are we severing? Our age-old habit of dependence on the objects of the senses, the conceptual thoughts of clinging from beginningless past. In the Tibetan translation, clinging is translated as habitual tendencies. The meaning is, how do we, through what method do we purify this? How do we purify the extremely severe habitual tendencies from the past and obtain the dharani? As for dharani, it means complete retention, pure wisdom, the dharani of non-forgetting, etc. To gain the wisdom and vision of the Buddhas, how do we? By generating the supreme bodhicitta to seek Buddhahood, and then purifying our own beginningless various habitual tendencies and conceptual thoughts. In the orthodox lineage commentary on the Shurangama Sutra, it explains this as the mind of dualistic grasping from beginningless time. It means the mind of dualistic grasping must be purified, and then obtain the pure dharani, and enter into the wisdom and vision of the Buddha. Ananda requested the Buddha, let's see if we can still find a way. Some of us, often when meeting some masters, hope, please bless me, purify my karmic obstacles from beginningless time, so that I can realize the mind and see the true nature in this very life, and immediately see the true nature and become a Buddha. Please grant me your full blessing. Some are like this, making relatively good resolves. Some are quite pitiful. Yesterday during the speaking quiz there was a nun who said, "Oh, I don't want to be a monastic anymore." I didn't even want to respond to her. Very much so. She has already put on the monastic robes, yet says, "I don't want to be a monastic now." Being a layperson is very good. I thought, is there something wrong mentally or what? Having already been ordained and then not wanting to be a monastic. This kind of thing is quite absurd, because perhaps she has no strong mind of her own, or perhaps there is a mental issue. I am not too sure. I don't want to try to understand this, nor do I want to engage with it. But there are some who are indeed very anxious to be ordained, very anxious to see their true nature. Now, in such an excellent opportunity, I truly want to recognize my own mind and truly eliminate my afflictions. If we have such a particularly urgent mind, under this kind of driving force and psychological state, there will definitely be a kind of ability. Therefore, our practice sometimes depends on ourselves. Some people are truly very determined, thinking they absolutely must practice it well. Whether it is praying to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or cultivating a pure view towards the Master, whatever mind state it is, there are very many positive ones and very few negative ones. For some people, indeed, in the process of practicing, they are both distracted and lazy, and what's even more serious, they might break precepts or ruin their right views. This is extremely terrifying. Therefore, every sentient being is indeed extremely. Capacities vary vastly. There are all kinds of people. For someone with relatively good habitual tendencies from past lives, if they are just slightly prompted in this life, they will immediately have the opportunity to awaken and elevate themselves. If the karma from past lives is very heavy, then perhaps no matter how many spiritual friends come before you, whether they beat you with sticks and stones, or use the Dzogchen method of directly pointing out the nature of mind to you, I'm afraid there might not necessarily be any way to help. You might just keep sinking lower and lower. There is this difference. So at that time, Venerable Ananda was extremely sincere before the Buddha, constantly hoping, is there a way for our habitual tendencies from beginningless time to be completely burned away, so that the Buddha's view can be attained indivisibly in a very short time? After he finished speaking, having made this request, Ananda bowed to the ground, and all in the assembly single-mindedly awaited the Buddha's compassionate instruction. After Ananda finished speaking, he immediately bowed with his 5 limbs touching the ground to him. After that, within the great assembly, he seemed completely focused, because he had said what he needed to say, and cried as much as he needed to cry, and done everything he needed to do. Then he sat in one place within the assembly, constantly waiting for the teaching of the greatly compassionate Buddha. He had already said what he needed to say. He didn't know if there was any hope. Actually, some of his expressions were also very respectful, but also very anxious and very earnest, continuously asking questions. I wonder if Ananda will cry again in the future. Everyone should remember this. Because he has already cried 5 times, he has bowed many times. It must be like this. Sometimes it might be that the relationship between some masters and disciples might also be like this. One moment the relationship is very good, the next moment it is not very good. Especially in the past, when going out with His Holiness, Manager Sotan would often observe His Holiness's face. Today His Holiness is definitely unhappy. What is the problem? What is the reason? Sometimes he was very happy. Today it seems His Holiness is very happy. His expressions were all very good. Rest assured, everyone. Sometimes we didn't pay much attention, and we would tell him His Holiness wouldn't be so happy one moment, and then it's not that simple. If he is unhappy, it is definitely not because he is unhappy with us. Perhaps he is unhappy seeing samsara. He would sometimes start to swear, absolutely not. He is definitely unhappy with us. Venerable Ananda was tired now. He wholeheartedly waited there for the Buddha's compassionate teaching. At this time, then the world-honored one took pity on all the hearers of the teaching and on the solitary sages in the assembly who did not yet abide effortlessly in the fully awakened mind. He took pity also on the beings who would be born after the Buddha's bodiless nirvana during the time of the Dharma's ending, so that all would resolve their minds upon becoming fully awake. He revealed the wondrous path of practice in accord with the supreme vehicle. The Buddha felt special compassion for those of the hearer and solitary sage lineage, as well as some ordinary beings who had not yet attained mastery in bodhicitta, because at that time the Buddha, perhaps these hearers and solitary sages present, in some commentaries in the Tibetan translation it seems to be, those who have not yet attained mastery in bodhicitta of the hearer and solitary sage lineage. They take this latter part as a modifier for hearers and solitary sages. There is also this view, but either way is fine. Whether it's towards hearers and solitary sages or those who have not attained mastery in bodhicitta, especially towards sentient beings of the Dharma ending age, after the Buddha enters nirvana in the future, generating bodhicitta, he revealed the supreme vehicle to them, allowing them to practice the supreme Dharma. The Buddha began to give teachings and instructions. The Buddha did this for these reasons. You see, those present for the benefit of these sentient beings and for the benefit of future sentient beings. So for some of us Dharma masters, indeed we must on the one hand consider those currently present with us or sentient beings of the current era, and also our Buddha Dharma. After we leave this world, how will these people in the future benefit from it? Regarding this point, although we now might not have the same conveniences in various aspects as before, but sometimes are constantly changing. These past few days I have also been communicating with some, including some volunteer workers here. Now we have some relatively high-end technologies. In this way, perhaps for these people in the future, including audio and video, or some Buddhist sutras and teachings of some eminent monks and great masters, can be received by them over a long period. Some are in text in books, and there are also various relatively simple and easy-to-use electronic materials. For these we also need to consider them. Our current era might be a little better. Perhaps the future will be better. Perhaps the future will be worse. I myself have been thinking, for my generation, it might be over very soon. When we reach this age, basically it is As I told everyone before, basically after a few more years, even if causes and conditions in all aspects are complete, our own stinking skin bags will be of no use. This is a natural law, but I think many of the people here should be the masters of the next generation. So for our generation, no matter what. I also sometimes think to myself, I have no regrets. Anyway, I have already made an effort. Personally speaking, whether it is translation, teaching, or volunteering, managing, or building Dharma halls, in all aspects, anyway, in a short human life, for an ordinary person, I have also made some efforts myself. Some have borne fruit, some have not. But no matter what, the effort was made. I think for our next generation, let's see how you guys act in your era. People of your era also need to think about the future. For example, leaving behind some materials. Perhaps after those of us present leave, these materials we leave behind, these audio and video recordings we leave behind, might be even more meaningful for them. Perhaps it might not be meaningful, but if it is not meaningful, it might not necessarily be harmful either. So in this aspect, one probably needs to consider it. You see, the Buddha frequently in many Buddhist sutras always thinks about sentient beings in the future Dharma ending age. Including when we were teaching the Shurangama Sutra, there are many places where such phenomena appear. At that time the Buddha proclaimed to these sentient beings, "You have all made a firm resolve to become enlightened, and you have not wearied of your practice of the Samadhi of the Buddhas, the thus come ones. Therefore you should now understand two definitive principles concerning your resolve to become enlightened." It says here the Buddha begins to proclaim. What does he proclaim? Ananda and the rest of the Great Assembly, you should have a definitive resolution to generate bodhicitta. One point is here, you have all made a firm resolve to become enlightened. You must have a firm resolution to generate bodhicitta. And if you generate bodhicitta, you must not become weary of the samadhi of the Buddhas, the thus come ones. For those of us sitting here it is the same. If I am truly a good practitioner, my bodhicitta absolutely cannot regress. Towards my meditation samadhi, the great Shurangama Samadhi, towards such practice, I must not become weary. For many of us sitting here, aside from a very few lay practitioners, for lay people, perhaps due to family life and various reasons, they might still have to struggle in samsara. But for monastics, if you don't, just like what I encountered yesterday, wanting to return to lay life, wanting to return immediately, feeling that being a monastic is uncomfortable, she said that, if being a monastic is uncomfortable for you, why did you become ordained in the first place? Did you get ordained to be comfortable? If it is not like this, basically, I think as a monastic then you should generate Mahayana bodhicitta and practice Zen meditation. This should be our undeniable duty. It should be our own responsibility. Everyone should know this. If that's the case, what must one first understand regarding generating the resolve? The two definitive principles of the initial resolve. These two definitive principles are explained quite extensively below. If you truly want to be like a Mahayana practitioner generating bodhicitta and not becoming weary of meditation, if that's the case, you must first have two kinds of resolves. At the beginning of generating the resolve, there are two definitive principles. Two definitive principles. They will be explained below. What are the two definitive principles? They will be explained below. Of the initial resolve, at the very beginning of making the resolve, there are two definitive principles, or two kinds of definitive resolves. One is, when we talk about generating the resolve at the stage of cause and the resolve at the stage of fruition must correspond. One definitive resolve is this. There is also another definitive resolve. Afflictions are bodhi, below are all. Because for Ananda, he has always been bound by a kind of grasping. Both cause and fruition have a kind of conceptual thought. Afflictions always have a substantial characteristic. Addressing Ananda, these two deluded thoughts should be dispelled. One is that cause and fruition must correspond. The essence of afflictions must be pure. So these two issues will be discussed below. Generating the mind for the benefit of others, seeking perfect bodhi. Here it talks about bodhicitta, focused on the Buddha fruition, and bodhicitta focused on sentient beings. Here it might be slightly different. The explanation here is a bit different. Next it says, the first of the two, Ananda. What are these two definitive principles? The Buddha will explain below. Which two definitive principles? First, the Buddha tells Ananda, the first principle. What is the first definitive principle? All of you who wish to renounce the lesser vehicle of the hearers of the teaching and to practice in accord with the vehicle of the bodhisattvas, so that you can gain the wisdom and vision of the Buddhas, must examine the resolve that is the basis of your practice, that leads to enlightenment. Is this resolve identical to the awakening that will be the result of your practice, or is it not? He says, the first one. Didn't we just say there are two definitive principles? Among the two definitive principles, what is the first principle? If you all wish to discard, to renounce the Hira vehicle and practice the Bodhisattva vehicle, the Mahayana, to enter into the wisdom and vision of the Buddha, then what should you do first? You should observe very carefully the generation of the resolve at the causal stage and the awakening at the fruition stage. Are these two the same or different? This implies that Ananda thought this kind of resolve at the causal stage must definitely be different from the fruition stage. The causal stage involves the conceptual mind, the fruition stage is without the conceptual mind. This is what he was thinking, and the Buddha disagreed. If your mind at the causal stage is impermanent, and the mind at the fruition stage is permanent, then these two definitely do not match. Therefore, when we sentient beings are at the causal stage, the Tathagata Garbha is already present. At the fruition stage it merely manifests. There is no new Buddha that appears. He mainly wants to explain this principle to him. He says here, first you must observe the mind at the causal stage. The resolve we make at the causal stage, and then the awakened mind attained at the fruition stage. Are they the same or not the same? This needs to be observed. Then the Buddha says, if the mind that comes into being and ceases is the basis of your practice, Ananda, with a mind that arises and perishes as the fundamental cause of practice, then you will not be able to ride the Buddha's vehicle to where there is nothing that comes into being or ceases to be. The Buddha directly explains this very clearly to him. If you think, just as you are thinking now, that at the causal stage you practice with a mind subject to arising and perishing, and then when reaching the fruition stage, after seeking Buddhahood in this way, when reaching the fruition stage, a kind of awakening without arising and perishing, or a kind of wisdom without arising and perishing, will manifest, then this is impossible. There can absolutely be no such situation. Therefore we might, schools that hold a realist view, all think that there is a causal relationship between becoming a Buddha and sentient beings. From tantric teachings upwards, all consider that there is no causal relationship. Sentient beings are precisely the Buddha. This is the principle. Therefore he says here, using a mind subject to arising and perishing, to seek something that has no arising and perishing is impossible. This might be very difficult to accept for the general common vehicle and ordinary worldly people. For this reason, you should shine the light of your understanding on the phenomena of the material world. Since all phenomena are subject to change and decay, he continues below. Because of this reason, you should also understand, Ananda. You should understand. If we use the material world as an analogy, the material world actually is operable. It is of the nature of conditioned dharmas. Since it is of an operable, constructible nature as a dharma, then it will definitely undergo continuous arising, perishing, and transformation. Speaking of the material world, it goes through formation, abiding, destruction, and emptiness, and so on. It is subject to change. Given this, the Buddha tells Ananda, contemplate the phenomena of the world, Ananda. Which one of them does not decay? Then take a look at this world, whether it's the material world or the sentient world, of all conditioned dharmas, those subject to cause and effect, arising and perishing. Among these dharmas, is there any that does not decay? Is there any that is without arising and perishing? There are none. But you will never hear of space decaying. But there is also something quite special. From beginning to end, one has never heard of anyone destroying space. Therefore, the relationship between our material world and space is very wondrous. One is something that no one can destroy, and the other can be destroyed any time, anywhere. So what he wants to explain below is this. He wants to make it clear to Ananda, including our bodies and the four elements, all the material and sentient worlds belong to conditioned dharmas. They are subject to arising and perishing. But our mind nature, the Tathagata Garbha, is like space. It has always been without arising and perishing. No one has ever heard or seen space being destroyed, or space dying, or space falling ill, or space feeling unhappy right now. Has there ever been such a thing? Absolutely not. By the same reasoning, the true nature of our Tathagata Garbha is actually exactly like this. He wants to explain this to him. Why? Space is unconditioned, and so it has never been and can never be subject to dissolution. Why is it said like this? Because space originally is not something that can be constructed. It is an unconditioned dharma. Therefore, and so it has never been destroyed, nor has it perished. This means our mind nature is also like this. The above should be explaining the relationship between cause and effect, explaining the corresponding relationship between cause and effect. Next, it talks about eliminating the 5 turbidities. These 5 turbidities are slightly different from the 5 turbidities we usually talk about. When talking about the 5 turbidities, first it talks about the body, the turbidity of the body. Then it gives an analogy for turbidity. It approaches from these 2 aspects. First, let's discuss what exactly the turbidity of the body is. Didn't we just say that the material world is subject to destruction, and space is not subject to destruction? Now, applying this material and sentient world to the bodies of us sentient beings, the body is composed of the 4 elements. It is subject to destruction and defilement by turbidity, but our mind is not subject to destruction. This is the meaning. But this way of explaining might be slightly difficult to understand. In your own body, what appears as solid is composed of the primary element earth. What is moist contains the primary element water. What has warmth belongs to the primary element fire, and movement constitutes the primary element wind. Then, speaking of our body, speaking of the body, everyone knows the bones within our body, including these relatively hard parts, can all be said to be the earth element. Then, the various fluids in our body, like blood, pus, yellow fluids, and so on, these moist parts are the water element. Then the body's warmth, temperature, and heat, these aspects are the fire element. And the body's breathing, shaking, all its movements and actions are the wind element. This is in regard to the body. It is composed of the 4 elements, earth, water, fire, and wind. Because these 4 primary elements are bound together, your pure, perfect, wondrous, enlightened mind that understands is divided into the functions of seeing, listening, touching, and cognition. Turbidity, in 5 layers, comes about as a result, after being bound by these 4 elements. That is to say, our body is composed of these 4 elements. Because of this condition, it has actually divided the pure, perfect, wondrous, enlightened mind that understands within the mind streams of you, Ananda, and the others. The pure, clear, perfect, wondrous, enlightened mind that understands, in other words, the luminous mind of the luminous Tathagata Garbha. Actually, these external conditions of the 4 elements, This disturbance by the four elements, after intervening in our mind stream, we originally possess a perfect, pure, clear, permanent, unchanging Tathagata Garbha. But this Tathagata Garbha began to waver and began to divide. Divided into what? Into the functions of seeing, listening, touching, for example, the eyes seeing external forms, the ears hearing external sounds, the nose smelling external odors, the tongue tasting. What is it? Flavors, right? And the nose smells odors, right? The body feeling external touch, the mind cognizing external dharmas, and so on. These resulted in the appearance of our six bases, six sense faculties, or the various appearances of form, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Then from beginning to end, finally we have turbidity. In 5 layers comes about as a result. 5 layers means 5 folds, 5 types of turbidity. The 5 turbidities will be explained below. These 5 turbidities are slightly different from the ones we usually discuss. Perhaps the Tathagata, and this for us sentient beings actually, originally our wondrous awakened Bodhi mind is very pure, but relying on the 4 elements, everyone's situation is different. The 5 turbidities appeared, so what is called turbidity? Below, an analogy for turbidity is given. After this is finished, we will start explaining the 5 turbidities tomorrow. What is turbidity? What does turbidity mean here? Next, the Buddha gives Ananda an analogy to explain what turbidity is. The Buddha tells Ananda, let us consider an example. Water in its original state is pure and clear. For example, in our pools or mineral water, water is very pure. It doesn't have any impurities. As for water itself, it is clear and luminous. You could say it's something clear. While soil, ashes, and sand in their original states are solid and opaque. If it's dirt and dust, whether it is dust or sand, actually its essential nature is obstructive. It has substance and creates obstruction. Just now the inherent nature of water is without substance and obstruction. It is originally pure. As for the inherent nature of dirt and dust, whether it is dirt or dust, its inherent nature has substance and creates obstruction. It is obstructive. These defining attributes of water and of soil, ashes and sand, are such that they are mutually incompatible. The inherent nature of these 2 dharmas, the inherent nature of water and the inherent nature of dirt and dust, are actually mutually incompatible, mutually incongruous. They won't conform to each other. It is impossible for them to have completely identical essential natures. We often say fire and water are incompatible, but for water and earth, actually, the natures of these 2 are also completely different. Suppose that someone were to pick up some soil and throw it into clear water. The soil now loses its solidity, and the water loses its purity. If a worldly person, like when we were kids, would throw all sorts of things in there, if others couldn't see, they could be quite mischievous. For example, the teacher goes out. After the teacher goes out into the teacher's teacup, they'd put a little piece of cow dung. A little later, when the teacher comes back, they'd feel very proud. And all the kids below would be laughing secretly. Now when some kids are naughty, we also feel, oh, it's very normal for them to be naughty, so to speak, very bad. If a worldly person puts dirt and dust into clean water, then this inherent nature of soil and stone is lost, because the water was originally clean, so the soil might dissolve immediately. Its original obstructive substance is lost. The water loses its purity. The purity of the water also vanishes. After this, together they appear clouded, or we may say turbid. Appear clouded, because just now these 2, like chemicals mixing together, at this time perhaps its color and shape, all become clouded. He says here, when these 2 substances are mixed together, these 2 both, the originally pure water, now becomes polluted and turbid. The originally obstructive dirt powder now completely merges with the water, so it has become a turbid mixture, a turbid liquid. In this way, what he wants to say is, our body, and the Tathagata Garbha, when these two are mixed together, ultimately it becomes something neither here nor there. So right now, if we seem to half understand things, it is also because of this reason. It has always been very difficult to separate them. Together they appear clouded, or we may say turbid, appear clouded. What does clouded mean? I haven't had time to look it up, but there doesn't seem to be a direct translation. Appear clouded, it means its color and shape, the forms are mixed together. Because they all merge together, it is called turbided. The 5 layers of turbidity occur in the same way, and with the 5 turbidities you mentioned below, actually it's the same. This will be explained below. We will explain this principle in detail in the next class. Alright, we will stop here for today.
Bandara Banma Sadar